All right. Well, welcome to the Week 5 EXL recap. I'm Derek Tate, and we're going to run through some of the action in the EXL from Week 5 of NFL action, and we'll just take a quick look at the standings here real quick before we get started. It's the Vikings, the Speedsters, and the Dudes who are all sitting at 4-1. The Vikings right now all the way at the top one spot with 725 points for a little bit of a lead on the Speedsters at 676, and then the Dudes coming in at 656. The Yachts, they're at 3-2. We'll kind of go over the matchup and how they got to 3-2, but they're at 711 fantasy points scored so far this season. The Holdouts also sitting at 3-2, along with the Crushers. Right now, the Gamblers sitting at 3-2, but if the playoffs were to start today, they would be on the outside just looking in. They currently sit in the 7th spot. The Degenerates at 2-3, Cazadors at 2-3, and then the Musketeers and Marauders both sitting at 1-4, and the Aces still in search of their first win, sitting at 0-5 on the season. Look, we got to take a look at what happened with some of the action over in week number 5. And really the marquee matchup was between the Yachts and the Speedsters. And of course, it went ahead and messed up my feet a little bit. But the Speedsters barely edged out the Yachts. This was a matchup of 3-1 teams heading into this week. And both teams got solid performances across the board. I mean, 27 points for the Yachts from Kyron Williams. But Cooper Rush, no Lamar Jackson for the Yachts, and it showed this week. Just 1.16 fantasy points, 179-yard passing to go with not one, not two, but 3 interceptions on the week. And really, Jackson Dart stepped up in a big way for the Speedsters, along with Ashton Genty, another good week. And, of course, Puka Nacua and Jackson Smith-Njigba continue to do their thing. They just edge out the Yachts 140-139 to improve to 4-1 on the season. Then another 4-1 team, they had the beneficiary matchup against a winless Aces squad, and the Aces, unfortunately, they continue to struggle. Jalen Hurts with a solid 20-point fantasy day, but when James Cook isn't scoring touchdowns, it's tough to find fantasy points right now for the Aces. Cook just with 4.9 fantasy points on 49 yards rushing, no receptions. But you look at Zay Flowers, he's unfortunately kind of a victim of the fact that Lamar Jackson is not under center right now, and 9.7 fantasy points. One really big explosive play was what kind of drove most of his fantasy day. Did get 2 rushing touchdowns from Ramondre Stevenson, but he even lost a fumble. Still finished with 13 fantasy points. But across the board, Drake May continues to do his thing, even in a day where he didn't collect either a passing or a rushing touchdown. Still 12 fantasy points. Lad McConkey finally found the end zone for the Vikings, but Emeka Egbuka and Rico Dowdle were the story. Egbuka goes for 29. Dowdle over 200 yards and 34 fantasy points to go with a rushing touchdown as well on those 206 rushing yards, and also added an additional 3 receptions for 28 yards. And he's actually got a matchup against the Dallas Cowboys in a revenge game this upcoming week. But the Vikings improved to 4-1, 165-78. Then you kind of scroll down. It was another team that was trying to face off a 4-1 squad, the Dudes facing off against the Gamblers, and it was a matchup of 3-1s. And the Dudes so far just are riding the coattails of an Colts offense that has looked far more efficient than it did last year under Anthony Richardson. Daniel Jones with 16 fantasy points. Jonathan Taylor, 30 fantasy points for Jonathan Taylor on another 3 rushing touchdowns. And look, Stephon Diggs is starting to come alive here. 21 fantasy points, 10 receptions for 146 yards in his revenge game against the Buffalo Bills. And then on the other end, the Gamblers still have plenty of firepower with Patrick Mahomes and Jaden Daniels returning to the lineup. Corey Krosky-Merritt, 28 fantasy points. Better days are ahead for this Gambler squad. But right now at running back 2, they had to go with Sean Tucker. And then you look at Zach Ertz and Noah Fant, both in those flex spots. They both got a combined 0 fantasy points. So depth being a little bit of an issue with some injuries and bye weeks with the Atlanta Falcons. Both Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier were on the shelf. That opened the door for the Dudes to come away with the win and improve to 4-1 on the year, 139-125. The Degenerates, the defending champs, were entering their matchup riding a 2-game winning streak. They started 0-2, then they got back to 2-2. Unfortunately, the Marauders get their first win of the season against the defending champs, 154-136. Even with Geno Smith continuing to struggle, 228 passing yards and 2 picks, no touchdowns for Geno Smith. You got to wonder, is his job security, really all that secure entering week number 6 as he just continues to put up dud performance after dud performance. But Omarion Hampton getting hurt. That's really the big injury here for the Marauders. Only 10 fantasy points before he exited the game. Now he is on injured reserve. Jamar Chase, though, came through with a monster game in garbage time. 6 receptions, 110 yards, and 2 receiving scores. And Jalen Waddle, signs of life along with the stack with Tua Tagovailoa. 23 for Tua, 24 for Waddle. He does find Waddle on the long touchdown pass, and that is what helped the Marauders upset the Degenerates, and the Degens are below 500 once again with plenty of time to get things figured out. The Holdouts and the Crushers. It was a matchup. The Holdouts heading into this one 2-2. The Crushers were 3-1 through the first 4 games and still got a big game from Dak Prescott, did the Crushers. 29 fantasy points, and then on top of that, it was another 29 from Sam Darnold. So the quarterback position both went bonkers for the Crushers, but unfortunately, we see the ripple effect of Lamar Jackson once again. Derrick Henry, a player that doesn't really get involved in the passing game to begin with. You got arguably, if not definitively, the worst defense in the NFL right now for the Baltimore Ravens, combined with the offense lacking firepower and being able to sustain drives with Cooper Rush under center. Just 9 fantasy points for Derrick Henry. A rushing touchdown saves his day to a certain extent, but 33 rushing yards and a rushing score. His ceiling seems to be lowered while Lamar is dealing with that hamstring injury. Across the board, kind of some ho-hum performances by Michael Pittman and Keenan Allen, performing a little bit underneath what we've seen from them so far this season. But Woody Marks, after a big Week 4 fantasy performance, the Houston Texans dominated this game, but it was really Nick Chubb who saw the majority of the work, and said with Woody Marks only seeing, I believe it was 7 carries for 24 yards and no involvement in the passing game, no rushing scores. So that kind of is what opened the door for the Holdouts, and Justin Herbert and Mac Jones. Mac Jones with 24 fantasy points. And even with Amari DiMercado dropping the ball on the end zone, right on the doorstep of the end zone, and actually counting against him in some ways with a fumble lost instead of that explosive rushing score, still gets 6 points from Amari DiMercado. But Javonte Williams has been a huge story so far this year, and a 2-touchdown performance, 135 yards on the ground, and did catch a receiving score right near the doorstep of the goal line from 4 yards out. And Rachaad White also in an expanded role, kind of a baby Lev Bell, patient running style. The rushing yardage totals weren't there, just 41 yards on the ground, but did catch an additional 4 passes for 30 yards and scored twice on the ground for 21 fantasy points. And that'll do it for the Holdouts, who improved to 3-2 on the season. We did talk about the Aces and the Vikings, and one of the other teams that was really looking to bounce back was the Musketeers, who entered this matchup against the Cazadors 1-3, and it was a matchup of 2 1-3 squads. And the Cazadors just edge out the Musketeers 156-153. The Cazadors didn't get huge days from the Detroit Lions in his lineup, with Jared Goff going for 20, Jahmyr Gibbs going for his ho-hum 15. Quinshon Judkins continues to arguably be the best fantasy rookie running back in all of football right now. Another 110 rushing yards on the ground against a stingy Minnesota Vikings defense, delivered 15 fantasy points with no scores as Judkins continues to do his thing. Devontae Smith finally showed signs of life. A.J. Brown, not so much, but Devontae Smitty, the Slim Reaper, 8 catches for 114 yards, 17 fantasy points. They may be starting to get something going here with Marvin Harrison Jr., 11 fantasy points for him. But Darren Waller and Mason Taylor, a pair of tight ends in this format that had monster days. 17 for Taylor, 18 for Darren Waller. Waller barely played half of the snaps as he continues to kind of get ramped up. And then Justin Fields. If you watch the first 3 quarters of that game between the Jets and the Dallas Cowboys, You were kind of worried if Justin Fields might get benched. Instead, he finishes with 25 fantasy points, 283 yards through the air, and 2 passing scores with another 26 on the ground. But the Musketeers had their opportunities in this one, and certainly 153 is a solid outing. They just weren't able to quite get over the top. David Montgomery with a passing touchdown and a rushing touchdown for 17 fantasy points. Xavier Worthy, 8 fantasy points. Clearly, he's having an impact on this Kansas City offense upon return, but just no scores, no explosive plays in this one, which kind of kept his fantasy output modest. Another big day from Jake Ferguson, and speaking of tight end duos that got it done, it was Travis Kelce with 19 fantasy points, kind of turning back the clock. Better days are ahead for the Musketeers, but they dropped to 1-4 on the season. Now, as we take a look at the Week 6 matchups, it's going to be the Speedsters taking on the Marauders. The Marauders coming off of their first win of the season. Speedsters still in the hunt for that number 1 overall seed. The Musketeers, another 1-4 squad, facing off against another one of the Titans in this league through the first 5 weeks, in the Vikings, who sit atop the EXL standing. So a 4-1 squad against another 1-4 squad entering Week 6. The Cazadors trying to build off of what they did last week and improving to 2-3. They get the winless Aces. The Aces really have to come away with a win before the season is completely lost. They've lost a lot of ground, and we'll see if they can get it figured out. Just dealing with some injuries and trying to figure things out at specific flex positions. The Holdouts and the Gamblers, a matchup of 3-2 squads. Right now, the Holdouts projected at 125 to 105, but we all know projections can be a little bit funky. And then the Degenerates trying to bounce back and get back to 500, having their 2-game winning streak snapped. They'll take on the 3-2 Crushers. And then the Dudes and the Yachts in the game of the week. Dudes sitting at 4-1, Yachts sitting at 3-2. It looks like the Yachts are probably going to be without Lamar Jackson for a second straight week. The Dudes hoping A.J. Brown and company can finally get it right. They do get Josh Jacobs back after Jacobs was on a bye last week. Brown taking on the New York Giants tonight on Thursday Night Football. Should be a fun one here in the EXL. So until next week, we'll see you next time. And the EXL, pretty exciting stuff through the first month.